battered prescription pill bottles told a story that made Clara's heart race with terror. His breathing was shallow, his usually perfect dark hair disheveled, and his expensive white shirt wrinkled beyond recognition. "Mr. Rollins?" Clara whispered, approaching slowly. No response. His laptop screen glowed with what looked like a goodbye letter half-typed on the screen. The words, "I can't do this anymore," were clearly visible before the cursor blinked endlessly. Clara had cleaned for wealthy families before, but nothing prepared her for this moment. This wasn't just about losing her job anymore. This was about saving a human life. She could call 911, but would they believe her story? A young black woman finding the city's most powerful white man in this condition would raise questions she wasn't prepared to answer. The scandal could destroy both of them. But looking at his pale face and hearing his labored breathing, Clara knew she couldn't walk away. Her grandmother always said that when God puts someone in your path who needs help, you help them. No questions asked. She gently shook his shoulder. "Mr. Rollins, can you hear me?" Still nothing. The empty pill bottle scared her most. She quickly checked the labels, trying to remember the first aid training she'd taken years ago for her grandmother. Heart medication mixed with anxiety pills and alcohol, this combination could kill him. Clara's phone felt heavy in her pocket. One call could save his life, but it might also end the quiet stability she'd finally found working here. After years of struggling to pay for her grandmother's medical bills, jumping from job to job, this position had been her lifeline. The generous salary let her afford her grandmother's medications and keep their small apartment. But as she watched Ethan's chest rise and fall weekly, her decision crystallized. Some things mattered more than money or security. She pulled out her phone and dialed 911 with shaking fingers. 911, what's your emergency? I need an ambulance at the Rollins estate on Maple Hill Drive. My employer is unconscious and I think he's overdosed on medication and alcohol. The next 20 minutes blurred together. Paramedics rushed in, asking rapid-fire questions. Clara answered as best she could. They worked over Ethan's unconscious form, checking vitals and administering something through and for. Clara stood in the corner, wringing her hands and praying silently. "He's stable," the lead paramedic finally announced. "You did the right thing calling when you did. Another hour and we might have had a very different outcome." As they prepared to transport Ethan to the hospital, his eyes fluttered open briefly. For just a moment, his confused gaze met Clara's worried face across the room. She saw something there, recognition maybe, or gratitude. Then his eyes closed again and they wheeled him away. Clara sank into the leather chair facing his desk, surrounded by the evidence of a man's darkest moment. The goodbye letter still glowed on his laptop screen. Empty bottles reflected the lamplight like broken dreams. This powerful man who seemed to have everything had been ready to give it all up. She thought about her own struggles, the nights she'd cried herself to sleep worrying about money, about her grandmother's health, about her future. But she'd never felt as hopeless as Ethan must have felt tonight. Money couldn't heal a broken heart, and success meant nothing when you were drowning in grief. Clara began quietly cleaning up the study, not because it was her job, but because she couldn't bear to leave the space looking like a crime scene. She disposed of the empty bottles, straightened papers, and saved the document on his laptop without reading more than she'd already seen. Whatever had driven him to this point tonight, he deserved privacy in his pain. As she worked, Clara wondered if she'd still have a job tomorrow. Rich people valued their privacy above everything else, and she'd just witnessed the most private moment of Ethan Rollins' life. He might fire her to protect his reputation. The thought terrified her, but she knew she'd made the right choice. Her grandmother always said that kindness was never wasted, even when it cost you something. Tonight Clara hoped that was true. But how far would you go to save someone who could destroy your life with a single phone call? Would you risk everything for a stranger? Subscribe to find out what happens next, and let me know in the comments if you think Clara made the right choice. 3 weeks before that terrifying night, Clara Bennett had stood outside the Rollins estate gates, clutching a crumpled newspaper ad and fighting the urge to turn around. The massive iron gates and security cameras made her feel small and out of place. She'd answered dozens of job postings, but this was her first interview at a mansion that looked like something from a movie. Clara's morning had started at 4 a.m. with her usual routine. First, she checked on her grandmother, making sure Grandma Rose had taken her heart medication and blood pressure pills. Then she'd prepared breakfast and left detailed notes about lunch and dinner before catching 2 buses to reach this neighborhood where houses cost more than most people made in a lifetime. "You sure about this, baby girl?" Grandma Rose had asked as Clara straightened her one good interview dress. Rich folks can be funny about who they let in their houses. Clara had kissed her grandmother's cheek and promised to be careful. She needed this job desperately. Her current work schedule included cleaning office buildings at night, stocking shelves at a grocery store 3 mornings a week, and babysitting whenever she could find families who needed help. Even with all that work, she barely earned enough to cover Grandma Rose's medications and their rent. The security guard at the gate looked skeptical when Clara gave her name, but after checking his list, he directed her to the servants' entrance. Walking up the long driveway, Clara felt overwhelmed by the mansion's size. The main house was 3 stories of cream-colored stone with more windows than she could count quickly. Perfectly manicured gardens stretched in every direction, and she spotted a tennis court and swimming pool in the distance. Mrs. Patterson, the head housekeeper, answered Clara's nervous knock. She was a stern-looking woman in her 60s with silver hair pulled back in a tight bun and sharp blue eyes that seemed to see everything at once. "You're the Bennett girl," Mrs. Patterson said, looking Clara up and down. "You're younger than I expected." "Yes, ma'am, I'm 24, Clara replied, hoping her voice sounded steadier than she felt. "I know I don't have experience with large homes, but I'm a hard worker and I learn quickly." Mrs. Patterson led Clara through a maze of hallways, pointing out different rooms and explaining the daily schedule. The mansion felt like a museum with its expensive artwork, antique furniture, and crystal chandeliers. Clara tried to memorize everything while fighting the fear that she'd break something priceless just by breathing wrong. "Mr. Rollins values privacy above all else," Mrs. Patterson explained as they walked. "He doesn't interact with staff unless necessary. You'll rarely see him, and when you do, you're to be invisible. No chatting, no questions, no personal conversation of any kind." Clara nodded, wondering what kind of man inspired such formal distance from his employees. "The previous girl quit without notice," Mrs. Patterson continued. "Said the job was too demanding. I won't tolerate that kind of unprofessional behavior. Are you reliable, Miss Bennett?" "Yes, ma'am. I've never missed a day of work unless my grandmother was in the hospital," Clara answered honestly. Something in Mrs. Patterson's expression softened slightly. "You live with your grandmother?" "Yes, ma'am. She raised me after my parents died in a car accident when I was 8. She's got health problems now, so I take care of her like she took care of me." Mrs. Patterson studied Clara's face for a long moment. "The salary is $1,500 a week, paid every Friday. Health insurance included after your first month. You'll work Monday through Friday, 7 a.m. to 6 p.m. Weekends off unless there's a special event. No friends or family visiting during work hours. No using your phone except on breaks. Can you handle these terms?" Clara's heart nearly stopped. $1,500 a week was more than she made in a month at her other jobs combined. "Yes, ma'am, absolutely." "Good. You start Monday. Be here at 7 sharp." Mrs. Patterson handed Clara a small packet of papers. "Employment agreement, tax forms, and house rules. Read everything carefully and bring the signed papers Monday morning." As Clara walked back to the bus stop, her hands shook with excitement and nervousness. This job could change everything for her and Grandma Rose. No more choosing between groceries and medications. No more working until exhaustion just to fall behind on bills. That weekend, Clara read the employment packet 3 times. The house rules were extensive and strict, but nothing seemed unreasonable. She'd work in different areas of the mansion each day, following a detailed cleaning schedule. Personal items and Mr. Rollins' private spaces were never to be touched or moved. All staff members were required to sign confidentiality agreements about anything they saw or heard in the house. "Why you think he needs so much privacy?" Grandma Rose asked as they sat in their tiny kitchen Sunday evening. "Maybe he's just a private person," Clara replied, though she'd wondered the same thing. "Rich people are probably used to everyone wanting something from them. Or maybe he's got secrets to hide," Grandma Rose said with the wisdom of someone who'd lived long enough to know that money didn't always equal happiness. Monday morning, Clara arrived 15 minutes early, wearing her most professional clothes and carrying her signed paperwork. Mrs. Patterson seemed pleased with her punctuality and led her to a supply closet stocked with expensive cleaning products and equipment. "Today you'll work in the East Wing guest rooms," Mrs. Patterson explained. "Mr. Rollins is traveling for business, so you won't need to worry about disturbing him. Take your time and do thorough work. I'll check your progress at lunch." Clara spent the morning learning the layout of the East Wing and marveling at the luxury of the guest bedrooms. Each room was larger than her and Grandma Rose's entire apartment, with marble bathrooms and walk-in closets bigger than most people's bedrooms. Everything was already clean, but Clara dusted, vacuumed, and polished until each surface gleamed. At lunch break, Mrs. Patterson inspected Clara's work with a critical eye. She ran her finger along baseboards, checked behind furniture, and examined every surface Clara had touched. "Acceptable work for your first day," Mrs. Patterson finally said. "You missed some dust behind the lamp on the nightstand in room 3, and the bathroom mirror needs another pass, but overall you show attention to detail." Clara felt proud and grateful. This job was her chance to build a better life for herself and her grandmother. She was determined to excel no matter how demanding the work became. That afternoon, as Clara cleaned the mansion's main staircase, she heard voices from Mr. Rollins' study. He must have returned from his business trip early. She worked quietly, trying to be invisible as Mrs. Patterson had instructed, but she couldn't help noticing how tired and sad his voice sounded as he spoke on the phone. Over the following weeks, Clara settled into the rhythm of working at the mansion. She learned to navigate the complicated cleaning schedule, mastered the proper care of expensive furnishings, and earned Mrs. Patterson's grudging approval. Most importantly, she could finally afford her grandmother's medications without sacrificing other necessities. But as Clara worked through different areas of the massive house, she began to notice things about her mysterious employer. The mansion felt like a beautiful museum where no one actually lived. Most rooms appeared unused, meals were often left untouched, and she frequently heard Ethan talking on the phone in his study late into the night. Clara began to understand that Ethan Rollins, despite his wealth and success, was one of the loneliest people she'd ever encountered. Money had bought him everything except happiness. Ethan Rollins sat in his study at 2 a.m., staring at a framed photograph that never left his desk. In the picture, his wife Rebecca smiled brightly while holding their 4-year-old daughter Sophie in a park somewhere. Both had the same golden hair and green eyes, both looked at the camera with joy and love. Both were gone forever, and it was all his fault. 3 years had passed since the accident, but Ethan remembered every detail of that December evening. He'd been working late again, preparing for a crucial board meeting the next morning. Rebecca had called around 8, asking if he could come home for Sophie's bedtime story. "I'll be home soon," he'd promised, but soon turned into 2 more hours of reviewing contracts and making phone calls. By the time he finally left the office, Rebecca had texted that Sophie was already asleep and they'd wait for him to have dinner together. They never made it home. A drunk driver ran a red light at the intersection 6 blocks from their house. Rebecca's car took the full impact on the passenger side where Sophie sat in her car seat. The police said they died instantly, that they didn't suffer. Ethan supposed that was meant to comfort him, but it only made him feel worse. They died waiting for him to come home. The months after the funeral passed in a blur of legal proceedings, insurance claims, and well-meaning friends who didn't know what to say. Ethan threw himself into work, expanding his company and taking on new projects that required 18-hour days. Success became his drug, achievements his way of avoiding the pain that waited whenever he stopped moving. But success felt hollow when you had no one to share it with. Every milestone, every victory, every magazine cover featuring his face felt meaningless without Rebecca's proud smile or Sophie's excited hugs. He'd built an empire that felt like a monument to his failure as a husband and father. The mansion had been Rebecca's dream home. She'd spent months working with architects and designers, planning every detail of the place where they'd raise their children and grow old together. After her death, Ethan couldn't bear to change anything. Sophie's bedroom remained exactly as she'd left it, her toys arranged on shelves, her favorite stuffed animals waiting on the bed for a little girl who would never come home. Most nights, Ethan avoided sleep because dreams brought Rebecca and Sophie back to him, only to tear them away again when he woke up. He'd taken to working from his study until he collapsed from exhaustion, surrounded by contracts and financial reports that distracted him from the crushing weight of grief. His friends and business associates had tried to help in those early months. They'd invited him to dinners, introduced him to single women, suggested therapy or grief counseling. But how could he explain that he didn't want to heal? The pain was all he had left of his family. Moving on felt like abandoning them a second time. Dr. Harrison, his physician, had prescribed medication for the anxiety attacks that started 6 months after the accident. The pills helped him function during board meetings and business presentations, but they also made everything feel distant and foggy. Some days he doubled the dose just to make it through. Other days he mixed them with alcohol to quiet the voices in his head that reminded him he should have been in that car too. Mrs. Patterson ran his household with military precision, maintaining the illusion that everything was normal. She'd worked for his family since before he married Rebecca, and she understood his need for privacy and routine. The housekeeping staff changed regularly because few people could handle the oppressive atmosphere of grief that filled every room. Ethan barely noticed the staff members who cleaned and maintained his home. They were invisible to him, just part of the machinery that kept his life functioning while he focused on work and avoided thinking about anything else. He paid generous salaries and provided excellent benefits, but he didn't engage with them personally. Personal connections were too dangerous, too painful to risk. But lately he'd become aware of a new presence in the house. The young woman Mrs. Patterson had hired a few weeks ago moved through the mansion differently than the others. Where previous staff members had treated the house like a museum, this one seemed to understand that it was supposed to be a home. Small things had changed since her arrival. Fresh flowers appeared in vases that had stood empty for years. Windows were open to let in fresh air instead of keeping rooms sealed like tombs. The subtle scent of lemon polish replaced the sterile smell of disinfectant that had permeated the house. Ethan found himself listening for her footsteps in the hallway outside his study. She moved quietly, respectfully, but there was something warm about her presence that he hadn't felt in his home for years. Sometimes he heard her humming softly as she worked, old songs that reminded him of happiness he'd forgotten existed. Tonight, as he sat staring at Rebecca and Sophie's photograph, Ethan wondered what this new housekeeper thought about when she cleaned rooms that obviously weren't being lived in. Did she wonder why he kept a little girl's bedroom perfectly preserved? Did she notice that he worked 18-hour days to avoid sleeping in the master bedroom he'd shared with his wife? The medication bottles lined up on his desk reflected the lamplight like tiny sentinels. Dr. Harrison had increased his prescriptions again last month, adding new pills to help with the insomnia and depression. Mixed with the wine he'd been drinking since dinner, they made him feel disconnected from his body, floating somewhere above his pain. Ethan picked up his phone to call his driver, then remembered it was after 2 a.m. and set it down again. He'd been having strange thoughts lately, dangerous thoughts about joining Rebecca and Sophie wherever they'd gone. The guilt of surviving when they hadn't was becoming harder to carry each day. Maybe tonight he'd take a few extra pills, drink a little more wine, and see if he could find the courage to stop carrying this burden. Maybe tonight he'd finally do what he should have done 3 years ago instead of letting grief turn him into a ghost haunting his own life. As Ethan reached for the first bottle of pills, he thought he heard soft footsteps in the hallway outside his study. The new housekeeper must be working late, making sure everything was perfect for tomorrow. He wondered if she had family waiting for her at home, people who loved her and worried when she was late. The thought made him pause with the pill bottle in his hand. Someone with a family to care about would understand what he'd lost. Someone with love in their life would know how empty his had become. But that someone was just another invisible employee he'd never actually met, and she had her own life to worry about. Ethan opened the bottle and poured pills into his palm, ready to swallow them with the last of his wine. 2 days after returning from the hospital, Ethan sat in his study trying to process what had happened. The doctors had been discreet but firm in their warnings about mixing alcohol with his medications. He'd come closer to ending his life than he'd intended, and the realization left him shaken in ways he hadn't expected. But what haunted him most wasn't his near-death experience. It was the memory of kind brown eyes filled with worry as paramedics worked over him. Clara Bennett, his new housekeeper, had saved his life and then disappeared from his thoughts until Mrs. Patterson mentioned that she'd been the one to find him. The girl showed real presence of mind, Mrs. Patterson had reported during their brief conversation about that night. She could have panicked or tried to handle it herself, but she called for help immediately and stayed calm while the paramedics worked. Ethan realized he'd never actually seen Clara clearly before. She'd been working in his house for over a month, but like all his staff, she'd remained invisible to him. Now he found himself curious about the person who'd chosen to save his life when she could have simply walked away and reported finding him the next morning. Mrs. Patterson had assured him that Clara had signed the same confidentiality agreement as all his employees, and that she understood the importance of discretion regarding his private affairs. But Ethan wanted to know more about her character than what legal documents could guarantee. That's when he decided to test her. It was a Thursday afternoon when Ethan deliberately positioned himself on the leather couch in his study, pretending to be asleep. He'd heard Clara's footsteps in the hallway and knew she'd be cleaning the study soon. His laptop was open on his desk with quarterly reports displayed on the screen, important documents were scattered across the coffee table within easy reach, and his wallet lay conspicuously on the bookshelf beside a crystal paperweight worth several $1,000s. Ethan controlled his breathing to appear deeply asleep while keeping his ears attuned to every sound Clara made as she entered the room. He heard her gentle intake of breath when she noticed him on the couch, followed by several moments of complete silence. She was probably deciding whether to wake him or come back later. Instead of retreating, Clara moved further into the room with careful, quiet steps. Ethan listened as she began dusting the bookshelves, working around his wallet and the other valuable items without disturbing them. Her movements were deliberate and respectful, never coming close enough to invade his space on the couch. After several minutes, Ethan heard Clara set down her cleaning supplies and approach him slowly. He fought to keep his breathing steady and his eyes closed as she stopped beside the couch. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Clara did something that surprised him completely. She walked to the closet where Mrs. Patterson kept extra linens and returned with a soft throw blanket. Moving with incredible gentleness, she draped it over Ethan's sleeping form, being careful not to wake him. Her touch was so light he barely felt it, but the gesture was unmistakably kind. Ethan's heart did something strange in his chest. When was the last time someone had tucked him in, had cared whether he was comfortable? Not since Rebecca, certainly. The simple kindness of that gesture hit him harder than he'd expected. Clara continued cleaning around him, her movements even quieter now that she'd covered him with the blanket. She dusted his desk without touching any of the papers or his laptop, straightened the books on his shelves without disturbing their order, and even picked up his coffee cup to wash it in the small sink he kept in the corner of the study. At one point, Clara paused near his desk where a picture of Rebecca and Sophie sat in its silver frame. Ethan heard her draw in a soft breath, and he imagined her seeing his family for the first time. He wondered what she thought about the photograph, whether she could see the love and happiness captured in that moment. When Clara had finished cleaning, she gathered her supplies quietly and moved toward the door. But before leaving, she stopped and looked back at Ethan one more time. He could feel her gaze on him, warm and somehow protective. Then she turned off the overhead light, leaving only the desk lamp burning so he wouldn't wake up in complete darkness. The door clicked shut behind her with barely a whisper of sound. Ethan lay still for several minutes after Clara left, processing what had just happened. She'd had access to his private study, his personal belongings, confidential business documents, and expensive items that could easily fit in a pocket. She could have taken photos of sensitive information with her phone, could have stolen small valuables, could have invaded his privacy in countless ways. Instead, she treated him with the kind of gentle care usually reserved for family members. She'd protected his rest, respected his belongings, and shown concern for his comfort without expecting anything in return. When Ethan finally sat up and folded the blanket Clara had covered him with, he noticed something else. The study smelled different than usual. Instead of the stale air and lingering scent of alcohol that typically filled the room, there was a fresh, clean fragrance. Clara had opened the windows to let in fresh air and had placed a small vase of flowers from the garden on the table beside his couch. The flowers were simple daisies, nothing expensive or elaborate. But they brought life and color into a room that had felt like a tomb for 3 years. Rebecca had always loved fresh flowers in the house, said they made every room feel more welcoming. Ethan found himself studying the photograph of his wife and daughter with new eyes. For the first time in months, looking at their faces didn't bring only pain. Clara's small gesture of placing flowers nearby had somehow made their memory feel warmer, more connected to life than to loss. Over the following days, Ethan began paying attention to other small changes Clara had made throughout the house. She'd been opening curtains in rooms that had stayed dark for years, placing books that had been left scattered back on their proper shelves, and keeping fresh flowers in vases that had stood empty since Rebecca's death. None of these changes violated the house rules or overstepped professional boundaries, but they showed a level of care that went beyond what her job required. Clara was treating his house like a home instead of a mausoleum, and slowly, almost without him noticing, it was starting to feel alive again. The test had revealed Clara's character more clearly than any background check or reference letter could have. She was trustworthy, kind, and respectful. But more than that, she seemed to understand that healing came in small gestures, gentle touches, and the quiet restoration of hope to places where it had been lost. For the first time since his family died, Ethan felt curious about another person. He wanted to know who Clara Bennett really was, what had shaped her into someone capable of such natural kindness, and whether she might be the key to helping him find his way back to the world of the living. The morning after Ethan's test, Clara arrived at work with butterflies in her stomach. She'd spent the previous evening wondering if she'd overstepped boundaries by covering Mr. Rollins with a blanket and arranging flowers in his study. Mrs. Patterson had emphasized repeatedly that staff were to remain invisible and never interact personally with their employer. But something about seeing him sleeping so peacefully on the couch had reminded Clara of her grandmother, who often fell asleep in her favorite chair while watching television. Clara always covered Grandma Rose with a throw and dimmed the lights, simple acts of love that made a house feel like home. When Clara entered the mansion that Thursday morning, Mrs. Patterson greeted her with an unusual expression. The stern housekeeper almost looked like she was trying not to smile. "Mr. Rollins left instructions for you to continue maintaining his study daily," Mrs. Patterson announced. "He was pleased with your work yesterday." Clara felt relief wash over her. She hadn't been fired for showing kindness to her employer. If anything, she seemed to have earned his approval. As weeks passed, Clara began to notice small changes in the mansion's atmosphere. Mr. Rollins still worked long hours and rarely appeared outside his study during the day, but the oppressive sadness that had filled every room seemed to be lifting slightly. Clara continued her routine of opening curtains, placing fresh flowers from the garden in various rooms, and maintaining the delicate balance between respecting privacy and bringing warmth back to the house. One morning, Clara discovered a note on the kitchen counter written in strong, masculine handwriting. "Thank you for the flowers. They brightened the room considerably." It was unsigned, but Clara knew it was from Mr. Rollins. Her heart fluttered with pleasure at this small acknowledgement of her efforts. The next day, Clara left a brief note of her own beside the coffee maker in Mr. Rollins' study. "The garden has beautiful roses blooming now. I thought you might enjoy them." She signed it simply CB, and left a small arrangement of pink and white roses beside his laptop. This quiet exchange of notes became a regular part of their routine. Mr. Rollins would leave brief messages thanking Clara for specific touches she'd added to various rooms. Clara would respond with suggestions about flowers from the garden or small observations about the house that might interest him. "The window in the library offers a perfect view of the sunset," Clara wrote one afternoon. "I opened the curtains so you can see it from your desk." "I'd forgotten how beautiful the sunset looks from that window," came his reply the next morning. "Thank you for the reminder." These small communications felt precious to Clara. She'd never had a job where her employer acknowledged her efforts so thoughtfully. Most of the wealthy families she'd worked for treated housekeeping staff like furniture, necessary but invisible. Mr. Rollins was different. Despite his reputation for being cold and distant, his notes revealed someone who noticed details and appreciated kindness. Clara began putting extra care into small gestures that might brighten Mr. Rollins' day. She'd arrange his favorite books in easy reach beside his couch, make sure his coffee was always fresh and warm, and leave small plates of cookies or fruit near his workspace. Nothing that violated professional boundaries, but gentle touches that showed she cared about his comfort. One afternoon, while cleaning Mr. Rollins' study, Clara noticed he'd left several photo albums open on his desk. The pictures showed a beautiful blonde woman and a little girl with the same golden hair and green eyes as the woman. Family photos from what looked like happier times: birthday parties, Christmas mornings, trips to the beach, ordinary moments filled with love and laughter. Clara understood now why Mr. Rollins seemed so sad, why the mansion felt like a memorial instead of a home. He'd lost his family, and grief had turned him into a ghost haunting rooms full of memories. Clara's heart ached for him as she carefully closed the albums and placed them on the shelf where he could reach them easily. That evening, Clara left a different kind of note for Mr. Rollins. "I'm sorry for your loss. Your family looked very happy together. Love like that never really goes away, it just finds new ways to live in our hearts." The next morning, there was no note waiting for Clara. She worried that she'd gone too far, that acknowledging his personal pain had crossed a line. But when she entered his study to clean, she found the photo albums arranged openly on his desk again, and a single white rose from the garden placed beside them. Clara took this as a sign that her words had offered comfort rather than causing offense. She continued her quiet ministrations around the house, but now she understood that she was helping someone heal from a loss so profound it had nearly destroyed him. As autumn arrived, Clara began leaving small seasonal touches throughout the mansion. She arranged colorful leaves in vases, placed pumpkins from the garden by doorways, and lit the fireplace in the main sitting room on chilly evenings. The house started to feel welcoming again, as if it was remembering how to be a home instead of a monument to grief. One October morning, Clara found a longer note from Mr. Rollins waiting for her. "Your grandmother raised you well. The kindness you show daily reminds me that good people still exist in the world. Thank you for helping me remember that there's still beauty to be found in simple things." Clara carried that note in her pocket for the rest of the week, reading it whenever she needed encouragement. Knowing that her small acts of kindness were helping someone heal gave her work deeper meaning than just earning a paycheck. She began to realize that she was falling for her mysterious employer, not because of his wealth or status, but because of the gentle soul she'd glimpsed through their written exchanges. His notes revealed someone who noticed everything, appreciated simple gestures, and was slowly learning to see hope again after tremendous loss. But Clara also knew that a relationship between them was impossible. She was staff, he was her employer, and the gulf between their social positions was too wide to bridge. She would continue caring for him quietly, offering kindness without expecting anything in return, grateful for the chance to help someone find their way back to life. What Clara didn't know was that Ethan had begun looking forward to her presence in the house more than anything else in his carefully structured days. Her notes had become the bright spot in otherwise dark hours, and her gentle touches throughout the mansion were slowly teaching him that healing was possible without forgetting the love he'd lost. By November, the silent communication between Clara and Ethan had evolved into something neither of them had expected. What started as polite notes about flowers and household matters had grown into deeper exchanges about life, loss, and hope. Ethan found himself eagerly anticipating Clara's responses to his messages, and Clara discovered that her employer was far more thoughtful and caring than his public reputation suggested. One morning, Ethan left a note that was longer than usual. "I've been wondering about your story, Clara Bennett. Your grandmother raised you after your parents died, you mentioned once. How did you become someone who sees beauty in everything despite experiencing loss so young?" Clara read the note 3 times before responding. For the first time, Mr. Rollins had used her name and asked personal questions about her life. She spent her lunch break crafting a careful reply. "Grandma Rose always said that pain either makes you bitter or makes you kind. She chose kindness every day even when life was hard. She taught me that taking care of others is how we heal ourselves. Maybe that's why I like bringing life back to sad places." Ethan's response came the next day. "Your grandmother sounds like a wise woman. I'd forgotten that kindness could be a choice rather than a weakness. Thank you for choosing it every day, especially for someone who forgot how to choose it for himself." As their written conversations deepened, Clara began to share more about her life outside the mansion. She told Ethan about Grandma Rose's garden behind their small apartment, where she grew vegetables and flowers despite limited space. She described the neighborhood where they lived, full of working families who looked out for each other through difficult times. Ethan, in turn, began opening up about his life before the accident. He wrote about Rebecca's love for decorating their home, Sophie's fascination with butterflies, and family traditions they'd shared during holidays. For the first time in 3 years, he was able to remember his wife and daughter with joy instead of only pain. "Rebecca would have loved what you've done with the house," Ethan wrote one afternoon. "She always said a home should feel alive, full of flowers and light and laughter. You've brought that feeling back to rooms that had forgotten how to welcome people." Clara treasured that note above all the others. Knowing that she was honoring the memory of Mr. Rollins' wife while helping him heal felt like the most meaningful work she'd ever done. One December morning, Clara arrived at work to find Mrs. Patterson waiting with an unusual request. "Mr. Rollins would like to speak with you in his study before you begin your regular duties," the housekeeper announced. Clara noticed that Mrs. Patterson's stern expression had softened considerably since Clara started working at the mansion. Clara's heart raced as she knocked on the study door. After months of communicating only through notes, she was finally going to have a real conversation with her employer. "Come in," came a deep voice from inside. Clara entered to find Ethan Rollins standing beside the window, looking out at the garden. He was taller than she'd expected, with dark hair touched by silver at the temples and kind eyes that seemed older than his 45 years. When he turned to greet her, Clara saw that he was handsome but worn down by grief, like a photograph that had faded but still showed the beauty of the original image. "Miss Bennett," Ethan said, his voice gentle but formal. "Please sit down." Clara perched nervously on the edge of the chair facing his desk, unsure what to expect from this meeting. "I wanted to thank you personally for everything you've done," Ethan continued. "Not just the excellent housekeeping but the way you've brought warmth back to this house. And for saving my life that night in October." Clara felt her cheeks warm with embarrassment. "I just did what anyone would do, Mr. Rollins." "No," Ethan said firmly. "Most people would have protected themselves first. You chose to help someone who could have caused you trouble just by being found in that condition. Your kindness probably saved my life and I'll never forget that." For several minutes they sat in comfortable silence. Clara noticed that Mr. Rollins seemed more relaxed than she'd expected, less intimidating than his reputation suggested. "Tell me about your grandmother," Ethan said suddenly. "Your notes mention her often, and she sounds like a remarkable woman." Clara's face lit up as she described Grandma Rose's strength, wisdom and determination to find joy despite life's hardships. She told Ethan about her grandmother's cooking, her stories about the old days, and her absolute faith that kindness always came back to you eventually. "She sounds like someone I'd like to meet," Ethan said when Clara finished. "Would you be comfortable bringing her for tea sometime? I'd love to thank her for raising someone who helped bring me back to life." Clara's eyes filled with tears of happiness. The idea that her employer wanted to meet her grandmother felt like the greatest honor she could imagine. She would love that, Mr. Rollins. She's always wanted to see the garden here. She says flowers tell you everything about the people who care for them. Then it's settled, Ethan replied. What day works best for both of you? As Clara left the study that morning, she felt like she was floating. Not only had she finally met the man she'd been quietly caring for, but he'd invited her grandmother to visit. More importantly, she'd seen genuine warmth in his eyes and heard real happiness in his voice for the first time. What Clara didn't know was that Ethan had spent weeks preparing for this conversation, wondering if the woman whose kindness had touched him so deeply would be as remarkable in person as she seemed through her notes. Meeting Clara had exceeded his expectations in every way, and he found himself looking forward to getting to know her better. For the first time since Rebecca's death, Ethan was thinking about the future instead of just surviving each day. Clara Bennett had shown him that healing was possible without betraying the memory of those he'd lost, and he was ready to explore what that might mean for both of them. The week before Christmas, Ethan's peaceful world came crashing down in the form of an unexpected visitor. Victoria Sterling, his business rival and former colleague, arrived at the mansion unannounced with a photographer and a tabloid reporter in tow. Victoria had been trying to buy Ethan's company for 2 years, making increasingly aggressive offers that he'd consistently rejected. She was beautiful, ruthless, and determined to get what she wanted by any means necessary. Her sudden appearance at his home with media representatives immediately put Ethan on high alert. "Ethan, darling," Victoria said, pushing past Mrs. Patterson into the main hallway. "I hope you don't mind the surprise visit. I brought some friends who are very interested in your recent lifestyle changes." Clara was arranging Christmas decorations in the living room when she heard unfamiliar voices in the hallway. Through the doorway, she could see a stunning blonde woman in an expensive coat speaking to Mr. Rollins in a tone that was both familiar and predatory. "I'm not sure what you're referring to, Victoria," Ethan replied coolly. "And I don't appreciate uninvited guests in my home." "Oh, come now," Victoria laughed. "Surely you're not going to deny your touching romance with the help. My sources tell me you've been getting quite cozy with your little housekeeper." Clara's blood ran cold. Someone had been watching the house, documenting her interactions with Mr. Rollins, and twisting their innocent exchanges into something scandalous. "I don't know what game you're playing," Ethan said, his voice dangerous now. "But you need to leave immediately." "Not until we get our story," the reporter interjected, pulling out a recording device. "Mr. Rollins, can you comment on your relationship with Clara Bennett, the domestic worker who's been living in your mansion for the past several months?" "She doesn't live here," Ethan corrected sharply. "Miss Bennett is a valued employee who works normal business hours like any professional. But sources close to the situation suggest your relationship has become quite intimate," Victoria added with a cruel smile. "Late-night visits to your study, personal gifts exchanged, long private conversations. Sounds like more than just employer and employee to me." Clara realized with horror that Victoria must have someone inside the house reporting on her daily activities. Every kind gesture, every note, every moment of connection between her and Mr. Rollins had been twisted into evidence of something inappropriate. The photographer began snapping pictures of the decorated living room, focusing on the fresh flowers and personal touches Clara had added throughout the house. Each photo would be used to support the narrative that she'd been living there as more than just staff. "Mr. Rollins has been lonely since his family's tragic death," the reporter said, speaking into his recorder. "Sources indicate he's become emotionally dependent on a much younger domestic worker from a vastly different social background. Questions arise about her motivations and whether she's taking advantage of a grieving widower's vulnerability." Clara couldn't listen to any more. She slipped out the back door into the garden, her heart pounding with panic and shame. In minutes, these people would destroy everything good that had grown between her and Mr. Rollins. They'd paint her as a gold digger and him as a fool, turning their quiet friendship into a public scandal. Inside, Ethan was fighting to control his rage. "You have 30 seconds to get out of my house before I call security and have you arrested for trespassing." Temper, Victoria taunted. "We're just trying to understand how a billionaire CEO ends up involved with someone so far beneath his social station. Surely his late wife's memory deserves better than this embarrassing situation." The mention of Rebecca hit Ethan like a physical blow. Victoria had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. "Get out," he said quietly, his voice deadly calm. "Get out now, and if I see one word of this fabricated story in print, I'll sue you and your publication into bankruptcy." "You can't sue the truth, Ethan," Victoria replied as she headed toward the door. And the truth is that you've compromised yourself with the help. Your board of directors will be very interested to hear about this lapse in judgment. After the unwelcome visitors left, Ethan found Clara in the garden, sitting on a stone bench with tears streaming down her face. She looked small and vulnerable in the winter afternoon light, nothing like the predatory opportunist Victoria had painted her to be. "Clara," Ethan said gently, sitting beside her on the bench. "I'm so sorry you had to hear that." "She's going to ruin everything," Clara whispered. "My reputation, your reputation, this job that means everything to me and my grandmother. She's going to make people think I'm some kind of criminal who took advantage of your grief." "No one who knows either of us would believe that," Ethan replied firmly. "You've never asked me for anything except the chance to do honest work. Your character speaks for itself." "But people don't know me," Clara said, wiping her eyes. "They'll see a young black woman working for a wealthy white man, and they'll assume the worst. They'll think I seduced you for your money or that you're having some kind of breakdown that made you vulnerable to manipulation." Ethan realized that Clara was right about how the situation would be perceived by the public. The racial and class differences between them would be used to support Victoria's narrative, no matter how false it was. "What do you want to do?" Ethan asked quietly. "I should quit," Clara said, though the words seemed to tear at her heart. "If I'm not working here anymore, there's no story for them to tell. Your reputation won't be damaged, and maybe they'll leave us both alone." "I don't want you to quit," Ethan said. "Clara, you've become more important to me than I know how to express. Losing you would be like losing light and hope all over again." Clara's heart soared and broke at the same time. Hearing Mr. Rollins say that she mattered to him was everything she'd dreamed of, but it was also confirmation that Victoria was right about their relationship being more than professional. "If I stay, they'll keep watching us," Clara said. "Every smile, every conversation, every kind gesture will be twisted into evidence that we're having an inappropriate relationship. Is that what you want?" Ethan was quiet for a long time, considering the impossible situation Victoria had created. He cared about Clara more than he'd cared about anyone since Rebecca's death, but he also knew that protecting her might require letting her go. "Let me think about this," he finally said. "Don't make any decisions yet. There might be another way to handle this situation." That night, Ethan made phone calls to his lawyers, his security team, and his public relations firm. If Victoria wanted a war, he was prepared to give her one. But he was also preparing for the possibility that protecting Clara might require sacrificing his own happiness once again. 2 weeks later, just as Ethan thought the Victoria Sterling situation had been contained by his legal team, disaster struck from an unexpected direction. Clara arrived at work on a Monday morning to find police cars in the driveway and Mrs. Patterson in tears in the kitchen. "What's happening?" Clara asked, her heart immediately racing with worry. "Someone broke into the house last night," Mrs. Patterson explained shakily. "They got into Mr. Rollins' study and the master bedroom. Several valuable items are missing, including some of Mrs. Rollins' jewelry that Mr. Rollins kept in his bedroom safe." Clara felt sick to her stomach. A burglary at the mansion would bring more unwanted attention and stress to Mr. Rollins when he was finally starting to heal from his grief. Detective Martinez, the lead investigator, was a serious woman in her 40s who'd been questioning the staff about their movements over the weekend. When it was Clara's turn to be interviewed, she answered every question honestly and completely. "You have access to all areas of the house," Detective Martinez noted, consulting her notes, "including Mr. Rollins' private bedroom and study." "Yes, I clean those rooms daily," Clara confirmed. "But I never touch his personal belongings or the safe. Mrs. Patterson gave me very clear instructions about that from my first day." "When was the last time you saw the missing jewelry?" Clara thought carefully. "I saw the jewelry box on his dresser Friday morning when I was dusting. But I never opened it or touched it. I wouldn't do that." The detective made more notes and dismissed Clara to continue her questioning of other staff members. Clara went about her work with a heavy heart, knowing that the break-in would cause Mr. Rollins even more pain. Rebecca's jewelry had been among the few personal items he'd kept close to him, and losing those precious mementos would feel like losing his wife all over again. That afternoon, everything changed. Detective Martinez returned with a search warrant and additional officers. They focused their attention on the staff quarters and began searching everyone's personal belongings. When they reached Clara's locker in the staff area, her world collapsed. Inside, wrapped in a cleaning cloth, was an ornate diamond necklace that Clara had never seen before. "Miss Bennett," Detective Martinez said grimly, "you're under arrest for burglary and theft." Clara stared at the necklace in shock, unable to process what was happening. "I've never seen that before in my life. I don't know how it got in my locker. You have the right to remain silent, the detective continued, beginning the arrest process while Clara's mind reeled with confusion and terror. Mrs. Patterson watched in disbelief as Clara was handcuffed and led away. There's been a mistake, she called after the officers. Clara would never steal anything. She's the most honest person I've ever employed. But the evidence was damning. The necklace had been found in Clara's personal locker, wrapped in one of the cleaning cloths she used daily. Security cameras showed that no other staff members had accessed that area over the weekend. Ethan was in a board meeting downtown when he received the call about Clara's arrest. He immediately left the meeting and drove to the police station, his mind refusing to accept what he'd been told. I want to see Clara Bennett, he told the desk sergeant. She's being processed for burglary charges, sir. No visitors until after arraignment. Then I want to speak with Detective Martinez immediately. When the detective arrived, Ethan wasted no time. Clara Bennett did not steal my wife's jewelry. Someone planted that necklace in her locker. Mr. Rollins, I understand this is difficult, Detective Martinez replied patiently. But the evidence is clear. The necklace was found in Miss Bennett's exclusive possession, wrapped in materials she had daily access to. Clara has been in my house for months. She's had access to valuable items every single day. If she was a thief, why would she wait until now to steal something? And why would she hide it in the most obvious place possible? People make mistakes when they're nervous, the detective suggested. Maybe she panicked after taking it and didn't think through the hiding place. Ethan felt frustrated and helpless. He knew Clara was innocent, but he couldn't prove it. Someone had set her up deliberately, and he had a strong suspicion about who that someone might be. At the arraignment the next day, Clara appeared in court wearing an orange jumpsuit, looking smaller and more frightened than Ethan had ever seen her. She'd spent the night in jail, unable to afford bail on her housekeeper's salary. Ethan immediately contacted his lawyers to arrange for Clara's bail, but the damage was already done. The local news had picked up the story of the billionaire's housekeeper accused of stealing his dead wife's jewelry. The headlines were brutal and played into every stereotype Victoria Sterling had tried to promote. Gold digger caught red-handed stealing from grieving widower. Housekeeper's greed exposed. Trusted employee steals dead woman's jewelry. Billionaire's poor judgment. How loneliness led to betrayal. Clara's photograph appeared alongside the headlines, painting her as a criminal who'd taken advantage of her employer's vulnerability. The racial undertones in the coverage were unmistakable, with several outlets emphasizing the class and racial differences between Clara and Ethan. When Clara was released on bail, she went straight to the mansion to resign. She found Ethan waiting for her in his study, looking as devastated as she felt. Clara will fight this, he said immediately. My lawyers are already investigating how that necklace ended up in your locker. It doesn't matter, Clara replied, her voice hollow with despair. Even if they prove I'm innocent, my reputation is destroyed. No one will ever trust me to work in their home again. And your reputation is damaged too because you trusted me. I don't care about my reputation, Ethan said fiercely. And anyone who believes you're capable of theft doesn't know you at all. Clara pulled her resignation letter from her purse and placed it on Ethan's desk. I'm sorry, Mr. Rollins. Being near me will only cause you more trouble. I need to go home to my grandmother and try to figure out how to rebuild my life. Clara, please don't do this, Ethan pleaded. You're giving up, and that's not the strong woman I've come to know. I'm not giving up, Clara said quietly. I'm protecting you. The same way you'd protect me if you could. With that, Clara walked out of the mansion for what she believed would be the last time. She left behind the job that had meant everything to her, the man she'd fallen in love with, and any hope for the future she'd begun to imagine. Ethan stood alone in his study, holding Clara's resignation letter and feeling more helpless than he had since the night Rebecca and Sophie died. Once again he'd lost someone who mattered to him, and once again he'd been powerless to prevent it. But this time he wasn't going to accept loss without a fight. 3 weeks after Clara's arrest, Ethan had barely slept or eaten. He'd hired the best private investigators in the city, reviewed security footage frame by frame, and pressured police to examine every angle of the case. But the evidence against Clara remained circumstantial yet damning, and she refused to see him or accept his help with legal fees. Ethan was sitting in his study at midnight, reviewing detective reports for the 100th time, when his security chief called with breakthrough news. Mr. Rollins, we found something. One of my guys was reviewing footage from the traffic cameras on the street outside your property. A car was parked across from your gate for several hours Sunday night, and we got a clear shot of the license plate. Whose car? It's registered to Victoria Sterling. Ethan's blood turned to ice. Victoria had been at his house the night of the burglary, close enough to observe the property and potentially enter the grounds without being detected by his main security cameras. There's more, the security chief continued. We pulled her financial records. She made a large cash payment to someone named Derek Torres 2 days before the break-in. Torres has a record for burglary and works as a handyman for several wealthy families in the area. Get me everything you can on Torres, Ethan ordered. And I want Victoria's phone records, her credit card statements, and every piece of evidence that connects her to this setup. By morning, Ethan had enough evidence to request a meeting with Detective Martinez. Victoria's financial trail showed payments to Torres that coincided perfectly with the timeline of the burglary. Security footage from nearby businesses confirmed that Victoria's car had been in the neighborhood at the time of the break-in. Most damning of all, Torres had a key to the mansion's service entrance, a key that had been reported missing from Mrs. Patterson's office 2 months earlier during a routine maintenance visit to the house. This is circumstantial, Detective Martinez admitted after reviewing Ethan's evidence. But it's enough to bring Victoria Sterling in for questioning. Victoria was arrested at her office that afternoon, surrounded by reporters who'd been alerted by an anonymous tip. Her carefully composed facade cracked when confronted with the evidence against her, and within hours she was offering to make a deal in exchange for a reduced sentence. The truth that emerged was even more calculated than Ethan had imagined. Victoria had orchestrated the entire scheme to destroy Clara's reputation and force Ethan into a vulnerable emotional state. With Clara gone and his judgment questioned publicly, Victoria believed she could pressure him into selling his company at a fraction of its value. Derek Torres had been paid to break into the mansion and plant Rebecca's necklace in Clara's locker. Victoria had provided him with the stolen key and detailed knowledge of the house layout, information she'd gathered during her uninvited visit in December. The plan had been perfect except for one detail Victoria hadn't anticipated. Ethan's love for Clara was stronger than his grief, and instead of being broken by her loss, he'd been motivated to fight for her with everything he had. When Clara heard about Victoria's arrest on the evening news, she was sitting in her grandmother's tiny kitchen, still wearing the same clothes she'd worn to court that morning for her latest hearing. She'd barely spoken in days, devastated by the betrayal she felt and the loss of everything she'd built. "Baby girl," Grandma Rose said gently, "that rich man of yours just proved he loves you more than his reputation. You better get yourself over to his house and thank him properly." "It's too late, Grandma," Clara whispered. "Even if my name is cleared, too much has happened. The newspapers, the arrests, the scandal. We can never go back to what we had." "Who says you need to go back?" Grandma Rose replied with the wisdom of her 83 years. "Maybe you need to go forward instead." That night, Ethan appeared at Clara's apartment door with flowers from his garden and tears in his eyes. "I'm sorry," he said when Clara opened the door. "I'm sorry I couldn't protect you from Victoria's cruelty. I'm sorry you had to spend time in jail for something you didn't do. I'm sorry your reputation was damaged because you were kind to a broken man who didn't deserve your compassion." Clara stared at him, hardly able to believe he was standing in her hallway. "But I'm not sorry I fell in love with you," Ethan continued. "And I'm not sorry that you saved my life in every way a person can be saved. If you'll let me, I want to spend the rest of my life making sure you never doubt how precious you are." Clara burst into tears and fell into Ethan's arms, feeling like she was coming home after being lost in the wilderness. They held each other in her tiny apartment while Grandma Rose smiled from her chair and the evening news played Victoria Sterling's perp walk in the background. "I love you too," Clara whispered against Ethan's chest. "I've loved you since the first note you left thanking me for flowers. I just never thought someone like you could love someone like me." "Someone like you," Ethan repeated, pulling back to look at her face. "You mean someone brave, kind, honest, and strong enough to save a stranger's life without expecting anything in return. Clara, you're exactly the kind of person I want to love for the rest of my life." Over the following weeks, Victoria Sterling's confession made front-page news and completely exonerated Clara. The same media outlets that had portrayed her as a gold digger now told the story of her innocence and Victoria's elaborate scheme. Public opinion shifted dramatically in Clara's favor, with many people expressing admiration for her grace under pressure and Ethan's loyalty in fighting for her. But more importantly than public vindication, Clara and Ethan were finally free to explore their relationship without hiding or shame. They spent long evenings walking in his garden, sharing meals with Grandma Rose, and talking about the future they wanted to build together. Ethan had found his way back to life through Clara's love, and Clara had discovered that true love could bridge any gap between different worlds. Together, they were stronger than the forces that had tried to tear them apart. 6 months after Victoria Sterling's arrest, Ethan stood in Grandma Rose's tiny garden behind her apartment building, holding a ring box and rehearsing words he'd practiced 100 times. Clara was inside helping her grandmother prepare Sunday dinner, unaware that her entire life was about to change. The garden was Clara's masterpiece, a testament to her ability to create beauty in small spaces. Despite the limited area, she'd managed to grow roses, daisies, tomatoes, and herbs that filled the air with fragrance and life. Ethan had spent many Sunday afternoons here over the past months, learning about Clara's childhood while helping tend the plants she loved. "You ready for this, son?" Grandma Rose asked, appearing at his elbow with the stealth of someone who'd been sneaking up on nervous young men for 8 decades. "I think so," Ethan replied, though his hands were shaking slightly. "What if she says no?" Grandma Rose laughed, a sound like wind chimes in the evening breeze. "That girl's been in love with you since she covered you with that blanket months ago. She's just been waiting for you to catch up." "I hope you're right." "I'm always right about love," Grandma Rose declared. "Now go get my granddaughter before she burns the cornbread fretting about what's taking us so long out here." Ethan found Clara in the kitchen, wearing one of her grandmother's aprons and humming while she stirred gravy on the ancient stove. She looked beautiful and completely at home in the tiny space, her hair pulled back and flour dusting her cheek from the biscuits she'd been making. "Clara," Ethan said softly. She turned with a smile that made his heart skip beats. "Perfect timing. Dinner's almost ready." "Did you and Grandma Rose solve all the world's problems in the garden?" "Not all of them," Ethan replied, stepping closer. "But we talked about one particular problem that's been on my mind lately." Clara tilted her head curiously. "What kind of problem?" Instead of answering, Ethan took Clara's flour-dusted hands in his and looked into her eyes. "Clara Bennett, 6 months ago you saved my life. Not just that night when you called the ambulance, but every day since, when you've shown me that healing is possible and love can bloom again even in the darkest places." Clara's eyes widened as she began to understand what was happening. "You've taught me that home isn't a building, it's the person who makes you want to be better than you ever thought possible. You've shown me that Rebecca and Sophie's memory isn't diminished by new love, but honored by it." Ethan dropped to one knee in the tiny kitchen while Grandma Rose watched from the doorway with tears in her eyes. "Clara, will you marry me? Will you let me love you for the rest of our lives? Will you help me turn that big empty mansion into a real home filled with laughter and flowers and Sunday dinners with your grandmother?" Clara was crying too hard to speak for a moment. When she finally found her voice, she said the only word that mattered. "Yes." The ring was perfect, a simple solitaire diamond surrounded by smaller stones that caught the afternoon light streaming through the kitchen window. As Ethan slipped it onto Clara's finger, she realized that all the pain and struggle of the past year had led to this moment, this promise, this love that felt too good to be real. "I love you," Clara whispered, pulling Ethan to his feet so she could kiss him properly. "I love you too," he replied against her lips. "More than I ever thought possible." From the doorway, Grandma Rose cleared her throat loudly. "Y'all can kiss later. Right now we got dinner getting cold and an engagement to celebrate properly." They were married 3 months later in a ceremony that perfectly reflected both of their worlds. The wedding took place in the mansion's garden, which Clara had transformed into a wonderland of flowers and light. Grandma Rose served as Clara's matron of honor, while Mrs. Patterson, who'd become like a second mother to Clara, managed every detail with military precision. The guest list was small and intimate, including only the people who mattered most to both Clara and Ethan. There were no society photographers or newspaper reporters, just family and friends celebrating love that had survived scandal, separation, and the interference of those who tried to destroy it. Clara wore her mother's wedding dress, altered to fit perfectly by a seamstress Grandma Rose had found in their old neighborhood. Ethan wore a simple black suit with a boutonniere made from roses Clara had grown herself. When they exchanged vows under an arch of white flowers, there wasn't a dry eye in the garden. "Clara," Ethan said, his voice strong and clear as he looked into her eyes, "you brought me back to life when I'd given up hope. You showed me that love doesn't have limits or boundaries, that kindness is the most powerful force in the world. I promise to love you, protect you, and cherish you for all the days of my life." "Ethan," Clara replied, her voice soft but steady, "you taught me that dreams can come true when you least expect them, that love is worth fighting for no matter what obstacles stand in your way. I promise to be your partner, your best friend, and your home for as long as we both shall live." When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, the garden erupted in applause and cheers. As they kissed for the first time as a married couple, Clara felt like her heart might burst with happiness. The reception was held on the mansion's terrace, with dinner prepared by the same caterer who'd handled Rebecca's memorial service years earlier. But where that event had been somber and heartbreaking, this celebration was full of joy and hope for the future. Grandma Rose gave a toast that had everyone laughing and crying at the same time. I knew from the first day Clara came home talking about her mysterious boss that something special was happening. Love always finds a way, even when it has to sneak around locked hearts and stubborn people who think they don't deserve happiness. Mrs. Patterson surprised everyone by admitting she'd been rooting for Clara and Ethan's relationship from the beginning. I've worked in this house for 15 years, and I've never seen it as alive as it's been since Clara arrived. She didn't just clean rooms, she healed a broken home. As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, Clara and Ethan found themselves alone in the garden where they'd shared so many quiet moments over the past year. The fairy lights Clara had strung through the trees cast everything in a warm, magical glow. "No regrets?" Ethan asked, pulling his new wife close. "None," Clara replied without hesitation. "This feels like exactly where I'm supposed to be." "Good," Ethan said, "because I have plans for us. Big plans that involve Sunday dinners with your grandmother, flowers in every room, and maybe some little feet running through these gardens someday." Clara's heart fluttered with excitement at the thought of children growing up in this beautiful space, loved and cherished the way she and Ethan would love and cherish each other. "I can't wait," she whispered, standing on her toes to kiss her husband under the stars. As they stood together in the garden that had witnessed their love story unfold, Clara thought about all the small moments that had led to this perfect ending. A blanket tucked around a sleeping man, notes left beside coffee cups, flowers arranged with care, and kindness chosen every day despite pain and loss. Love had found them both when they needed it most, proving that sometimes the most beautiful stories begin with the simplest acts of compassion. Clara Bennett Rollins was finally home, and she knew that whatever challenges the future might bring, she and Ethan would face them together, surrounded by love, hope, and the knowledge that kindness always wins in the end. Don't you wish all love stories ended this beautifully? Subscribe for more heartwarming tales that prove love conquers all, and tell me in the comments which moment from Clara and Ethan's journey touched your heart the most.